In part two of our video on standards-based learning, we're going to take a look at the different proficiency levels. So what is the difference between a 1, 2, 3, and a 4? Well, it is based on our description of what a 4, 3, a 2, and 1 actually is. A 4 we are describing as the highest level of proficiency. Students can work nearly all problems correctly, as well as some higher order thinking questions. Now, in the absence of higher order thinking questions, because let's face it, for every standard, we just don't necessarily have those, we're really going to focus on working nearly all problems correctly. What we're looking for is a lack of conceptual mistakes, that they're just not there. That if we make any mistakes, that they're minor, they're minimal, and they're careless mistakes. If we see a ton of careless mistakes, so we can't give that a 4 because it's not really a high level of proficiency. We're not attending to precision. So as an example, I'm going to show you 4 different uh, solutions for linear equations. So we have 4 different sample works and show you what a 4 versus a 3 versus a 2 and a 1 is. So on these problems right here, we have 6 linear equations. This particular student got 5 out of the 6 correct. The one that is starred was incorrect. Now again, we're looking for a lack of conceptual mistakes. So on this particular problem, they did correctly multiply by 2 on both sides to get 5x equals 6x plus 10, and then subtracted 6x correctly. But here's where we're running into the issue. 5 minus 6 is -1 and not +1. To me, that's not a conceptual mistake. That's a calculation error. They're showing the correct process of multiplying by 2, distributing correctly, bringing the one variable over to the other side correctly, but we lost the negative. That is a fairly minor mistake. It's one that, gosh, any of us can make. The rest of the problems are done completely correctly. So in that case, this particular student did meet the criteria that nearly all problems are done correctly, and there's no major conceptual mistakes. There's no conceptual mistakes at all. A 3 would be still proficient, but proficient enough to move on to the next topic. So we're not talking about excellent here. We're talking about good work, but not excellent work. They might still have a few deficiencies, but probably not enough to hamper their success on future topics. Most of their errors tend to be foolish ones, not conceptual. Again, those mistakes of not attending to precision. We might see more of those creep up here, but we're not seeing any major conceptual gaps. So again, we have those same problems, those same 6 questions, and now we have more mistakes. But none of these mistakes are conceptual mistakes. So for instance, on this one, the mistake here is that when we carried this x minus 3 down, accidentally wrote it as an x plus 3. That's not a conceptual mistake. That is a typographical error, or whatever you want to call it. But the process beyond that is absolutely correct. Step by step, it's right. But because they wrote x plus 3 instead of x minus 3, we don't get the same solution. So to me, that's proficient work. We're correct. It's just not really paying attention to details. In this one down here, we have the same issue that we had on that 4 level work. 5x minus 6x is x, and it clearly is not. On this one right here, x minus 5 divided by 2 equals x plus 2 divided by 3. The error that we have is right in this last step. Again, step by step correct until we get to the last one. 4 plus 15 is not 17, it's actually 19. Again, calculation error, not really attending to precision very well, but proficient enough to move on. They've got the concept of how to solve a linear equation. Maybe they're rushing through it, or maybe they're just not really double checking their work. So that's a 3 level in our 4-point scale. A 2 is misconceptions will affect future learning. They're not ready to move on yet. There's a number of gaps, and most of them are conceptual in nature. So they still might be making calculation errors, but really the important thing is here, they're making errors in the concept. So if we take a look at the first one here, 12 minus 8 is 4. That's absolutely correct. We've got a 5x, a 12x minus 10. Nothing wrong so far. Take away 5x from both sides. We're good. Here's where we run into a conceptual error. To reverse subtracting 10, we want to add 10 to both sides. And this particular person subtracted 10 from both sides. That's a conceptual error that does not reverse a negative 10. Same thing here. We have a very minor mistake, but again, a conceptual error. To reverse negatives or subtracting 6, we want to add 6 to both sides. Again, these are errors that are going to affect future learning. If we're not solving these correctly, we really can't move on. That's a 2 level. But there is hope. They're very close. A lot of the steps are correct. There's minor things that are holding them back, but they are conceptual in nature. Contrast that with a 1, the student needs some serious and immediate remediation. Taking a look here, right away, we're off the rails. We've got a +8 to get rid of this or reverse this subtracting 8. That's correct, except to reverse this, we would have to add 8 to the other side of the equation. They're treating this as 2 sides of the equation, and they're not. That's a major conceptual misunderstanding. This particular student has to stop. We got to go over some stuff immediately because they're definitely not ready to move on. So that's a different levels of proficiency, and just an example of this. The same problems worked out in a student that's at a 4, a 3, or 2, or a 1. So then how does this look in the gradebook? Now this is an example of standards-based learning that I actually did use during summer school. So this has been tried before. And I will tell you, just kind of as a side note, our summer school program was all students that from the previous year who had failed first semester of Algebra 1. Those are the students that I had. And they were from all schools across the district. At the end of the session, I asked for their feedback. You know, this was the first time that we tried this system out. We want to know, did you like it? If you did, what did you like about it? If you didn't like it, what didn't you like about it? All of the students that I had in that first semester session liked the system. Some said we loved it. It was so easy to understand what you didn't know and what you did know and get an idea of what you needed to work on. One thing that kind of stood out to me from one of the students' feedback was it was very difficult to explain to my parents that a 3 was actually a pretty good score. So that's why we're making this video, so you understand what the whole process is about and what a 3 is. It's not a bad score. It's a pretty good score, but it's not C-level work. So in the gradebook, you're going to see many categories, and this is from Skyward here. We've got the I guess, I don't know, we'll call it dark green category for homework. And you'll notice on that homework, it's just completion. You did it or you didn't do that. In the comments section, based on what I've seen from the work, I gave a score of 1, 2, 3, or 4. Again, 4 being excellent work. We're good to go. We've got everything correct. 3 being proficient. We've got some mistakes here and there, but nothing to hold us back. 2 is we've got some holes we need to fill in. And then a 1 was major work needs to take place right away. You'll notice that there's not a ton in the formative category, and it just had to do with the nature of summer school and its compact nature. Some of the standards I did have formative data for, others I didn't, just based on the nature of summer school. Within those categories, you'll see 3s, 4s. I don't think this particular student has any 2s. The assessment category will look a little different for us because we're gonna have 10 standards for quarter 1. This is an entire semester, so this is 20 standards. But you'll see the standards for the scores for every single standard. So a 4, a 3, a 4, and so on. Again, it's a limitation of our Skyward grading program. If I put a score in there, it's automatically going to calculate the percent. A C doesn't really mean a C, but based on the limited tools that we're using here with Skyward, that's what I have to put in. So if you're seeing 3s, that's going to be really the key. 3s, 4s, 2s, those are the numbers that you're looking for, not necessarily those. You might want to say that if you see an F on here, that's just something that they're not proficient at. They haven't met that standard. You'll notice here that we have our 20 standards, and then each standard has a score. Next to that, there's going to be either an M or an N. If it's an M, that means they have a 3 or a 4. We're considering them proficient at that particular standard, that they're ready to move on, they're okay with that. If you see this right here, standard 4, we've got a 2 score and an N. That means that in our judgment, they have not met the standard yet, that there's still some conceptual gaps, there's still things that we need to fix before they're ready to move on. However, this particular student had of the 20 standards, there were only 2 that they weren't quite proficient at, Standard 4 and Standard 11. In my estimation, that's B-level work. The vast majority of these were 3 and 4. We had a number at 4, a good quantity at 3. That's B-level work. So on that standard, basically that percentage breakdown that we had shown you in the first video, in the summative assessment category, which is weighted at 80%, their grade would be an 85. So that gets put in the grade book. It's the summation of all the standards that they've done. This will be a little bit different. The participation, that's the one where we're doing the practices, but it's still going to count for 5% of the grade. So in the end, we end up with a quarter 1 grade of a B+. This assessment, or the summative assessment category, is the vast majority of the points. It is about what the students know. We still have that 10% for skill checks, which again is what they know. The 5% for the mathematical practices, which is a demonstratable skill. The only part that's just compliance-based is the homework, but we're using that as a means to provide feedback. So again, if they're doing that, we can give feedback not only to them, but to you and to anyone else that needs to see that information. So again, this is just kind of a look into how we're doing standards-based grading. We'll create a video in the near future showing you how the website is set up through Skyward, the Course Learning Center, and how you can take full advantage of that.